Everything seems to look good. If there are any problems with the stream or with audio or anything, just let me know. I'll do everything I can to sort that out. I don't know. If you've watched these before, you'll know that they don't always go as smooth as I would like, but that's just the nature of live streaming when it's just me trying to sort it out, sat in my living room on my laptop. It's not exactly the most pro setup in the world. Well, thank you for joining me, whether you're watching this live or watching it on a rerun. So today I'm going to be talking about, well, you've probably seen the little bit of B-roll at the start, How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong by James O'Brien. What I'm going to start by talking about is, well, I kind of actually want to talk about my process for like creating these reviews. So what I'll do, obviously, I'll read the book. I read this one over the Christmas break, and what I try and do is kind of keep some notes on it as I'm reading it. Not great at that, because often I'm reading these at times when it's not appropriate or convenient to keep notes. So I'll try and go back afterwards, and I'll flick through and remind myself of things. The other thing that I like to try and do is kind of look at what other people thought about it, and I do that because it helps remind me of different bits of the book. It also helps me look outside my own biases or whatever, however you say that, and look at how other people from different backgrounds kind of viewed it, which was interesting for this one. So one of the main places I go to look at reviews and stuff is Goodreads, which, if you don't know it, it's a site that basically just you can go and you can review stuff, and it is what it is. You get lots of people. It's done on a star rating, and often people have very in-depth sort of thoughts on books, which is great. I mean, I'm all about in-depth thoughts on books. Sometimes it can be a little bit, a little bit of a shit show, but it's a good way for me to see the kind of different views on it. So the kind of loved it, the moderate views, and the hated it. So what was interesting when I looked at this book on Goodreads was the hate it reviews really identified with James O'Brien, but still hated it, which was interesting. I had to kind of preface this with this review with that, just because I kind of found that interesting. So Goodreads, recommend it if you're kind of thinking about, I don't know, next book you want to read. You've seen a book, you're like, should I bother? Maybe go and check it out on Goodreads. So first of all, I'll just kind of parrot what James O'Brien himself says about this book. So every day, James O'Brien listens to people blaming benefit scroungers, the EU, Muslims, feminists, and immigrants. But what makes James's daily LBC show such essential listening and has made James a standout social media star is the careful way he punctures their assumptions and dismantles their arguments live on air every single morning. So he's a radio host, and I'm not sure what LBC is. I should have probably found that out first. But yeah, so he's a radio show host, dealing with call-in type things. I always think of Frasier when I think of radio sort of call-in shows. I know there's far more than just Frasier, but that's my go-to. That's the thing I think of. I know there's only a couple of people watching, but if you do fancy just making your thoughts known, putting something in the the chat, that I'd be grateful. So I'll watch out for that. Even if you just want me to say hi to you, go for it. In How to Be Right, James provides a hilarious and invigorating guide to talking to people with faulty opinions. Okay. With chapters on every lightning rod issue, James shows how people have been fooled into thinking the way they do, and in each case outlines the key questions to ask to reveal fallacies, inconsistencies, and double standards. If you ever get concerned by ardent Brexiteers, Daily Mail disciplines, or Little England patriots, this book is your conversational survival guide. So that's one of the things I got from this book. I got a lot from that. The way he approaches these conversations. Now, I definitely fall on kind of the same side as James in a sort of political sense, socio-political sense, because he is kind of like, I'd say, left-leaning liberal, maybe, and I guess that's kind of where I fall as well. I'm not super outspoken about my political views, not for any other reason than I think people don't find it that interesting. I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I don't share them maybe as much as I could or should. But as a person who is of that political view, I often find myself in situations where people who have strong views on things like Brexit and things like, the other things that he's mentioned, like immigration, Muslims and feminists, things like that, they are the kind of people, or at least there are kinds of people within those view groups who will be outspoken, and that's fine. If you've got a view and you like to speak your mind, absolutely do it. What I've found difficult in the past is how to compose myself when speaking to people like that, because I often find that they can be intimidating, and the reason that they're intimidating is because if you go against their view, they have this argument of like almost on faith, as in like, this is what it is because I believe this is what it is. And as much as faith is a thing that we all kind of have, whether we like it or not, our faith in money being worth something is a faith, because it's not actually worth anything. Fundamentally, it's not worth anything. So talking to these people is often difficult. And you can go a couple of different ways. You can agree with people who are, talking about views that are opposed to your own, or you can, argue with them. You can just shout your own views back at them if you are on opposing sides, or you can try and reason with them, try and dismantle their argument with facts. But all of these kind of leave everyone a bit unsatisfied. What James O'Brien manages to do with his radio show and subsequently this book is give an extra option if you're speaking to someone who's got sort of vehement views on a subject that you disagree with. And what he says, basically, the reason this book is called How to Be Right is not because this is like a way to be correct all the time, but because it's a way to find the just way of talking to someone. So instead of dismantling someone's views, which he kind of actually does, but instead of, I think what he preaches is maybe a little bit different from what he exemplifies in this book, is kind of asking people questions like, okay, so that's your view, but why is that your view? And I think he does it in a way to entertain. Obviously, he's got a radio show, he needs to entertain. But I think you can take away the method without actually doing it the way that he does it. So I'll get to that in a minute. I just want to finish off the part, the bit that I've got that is actually James's views himself on what this book is. I have a ringside seat as a significant... What? I have had a ringside seat as a significant swath of the British population was persuaded that their failures were the faults of foreigners, that unisex lavatories threatened their peace of mind, and that all Muslims must somehow apologise for terror attacks by extremists. I have tried to dissuade them and sometimes succeeded. The challenge is to distinguish sharply between the people who told lies and the people who whose only offence was to believe them. That's an interesting point. So he kind of thinks that his belief is that people, and this is actually really interesting because it goes into one of the other books I've just read, Mindfuck, which is about Cambridge Analytica. And so basically he's got this belief that there's like the overlying sort of group of people who want you to see the world in a certain way, and beneath that are the people who are kind of like struggling day to day maybe, or they're looking for something to believe in and someone to blame, and so they just listen to this, this thing that's above them, which he kind of like looks at as like the Daily Mail, the certain political parties, the way that certain political parties, like if you do go and read Mindfuck by I can't remember his name right now, Chris, I've got it in my notes somewhere. If you do read that book, you'll see that actually a lot of this is potentially true, but how media and social media is like targeting certain people who they know that they can make believe certain things, and that's his, like, he's like, I'm not arguing with the person, I don't disagree, or I don't have any ill will towards the person that I'm arguing with. I have the ill will to the system that's in place that's kind of put them in this mindset, basically. So what he's trying to do is say, why do you think this? Do you think this because you've been told it, or do you think this because this is actually what you believe? All very interesting. And as I say, so kind of my points on this book, my sort of good and bad points. First of all, I like him as a personality. I've never listened to his radio show, but I do like him as a personality. He comes across as an interesting and open-minded person. I'm sure, based on some opinions I've read against him, not everyone believes that. People think he's a bit of a tear-down artist. But I think he lets people tear themselves down more than anything. So that's kind of interesting. What I dislike about this book, or the biggest criticism I have about this book, is the way that it's written, or at least the concept of how some of it is written. So much of it is this kind of just looking basically at transcripts from his radio show, stuff that if you really wanted to find it, I'm sure you could, or if you already listened to the radio show, you might recognise. And yes, I get this, that we're framing it in a different way now by taking it out of the radio show and putting a narrative and an explanation around it. It makes it in some way academic, as opposed to just listening to, like, him chatting to someone. Having that having that explainer before and after, it does. It works as a format. It's just not a format that I really like. I think the book that I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, the Malcolm Gladwell one, also suffers from this, especially in the audio version. So I've read this book as a physical version, and I do recommend it as a physical version. The Malcolm Gladwell one has this same thing where he's like found interviews, and he like is just showing you these interviews. And I get that we're bringing together sources of information that otherwise you wouldn't have maybe stumbled across, but we're putting them into another medium basically. And I don't know, like, as much as that works, I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't want to see lots of books doing that. I don't want to see lots of like TV presenters or radio show hosts synthesizing what they've spoken about and like verbatim putting the transcripts into a book. I think that's probably would get a bit tedious. So that's my biggest criticism about this. Some of the criticisms that I read, so one of the interesting criticisms that I read was, it was interesting to see that, no, that was me. So a lot of it could be seen as preaching to the choir. Yeah. So if you're reading this book, you probably aren't reading it because you don't like James O'Brien. As much as I try and find authors that I don't like the views of, that's not kind of the way most people read. So I've got one of my next books to read is, what's his name? Jordan B. Peterson or something like that, who I don't really like the views of, but I want to read his book just because I'm interested in, what those views represent and how he's putting them out there. Criticism about this book is that he is tearing people down for comedy's sake, and he's being mean to people basically. I don't think that's true. I get that he's doing this talk show as entertainment, and so it has to be entertaining. He can't kind of, it can't be boring, just because it can't exist that way. It wouldn't last. And another part of that criticism was he is actively kind of encouraging the opposition because he needs the opposition to have an interesting talk show. And there's a problem with that, in that he, or at least the way that is, the argument against that is that there's always going to be lots of people who want to, who have views that are against his, that want to talk about them. He doesn't have to create the bad guy. The bad guy is already there, essentially. So I disagree with that. Some of the views, the opinions that were kind of on the fence were very much like, I really like James O'Brien, so I thought I'd like this book, but I didn't enjoy it. He came across as patronising. Yeah, but the problem is, the kind of people that he showed off in this book, the kind of interactions that he showed off in this book, showed an alarming misunderstanding of the things that they were arguing for. So, for example, here we go. So, talking about the EU laws, and he was, which one's the one? Talking about EU laws, and he was speaking to a guy called Andy. Andy, I recently went self-employed a couple of years ago, so it was a big thing voting Brexit because I was building my business, but I think it's all going to be short-term. James, what is? As in, what is going to be short-term? Andy, the personal financial loss. It's like, so he's like, okay, why, why would you vote if there was going to be, loss? And then this guy, so James, to be fair, they did tell you before the vote that there wouldn't be any personal financial loss. Andy, well, I believe there would be, and I was willing to take that sacrifice just for the independence, so that we would control our own laws. James, you know what I do now, don't you? Andy, what's that? James, you know what I'm going to do now. Sorry, I'll ask you which laws you're really looking forward to not having to obey anymore. Andy, well, any? James, that's right, any. So give me one. Andy, the shape of your bananas. So this is a sort of quite a famous thing within the Brexit sort of scandal, that it was the EU controlled the shape of and quality of our bananas, and it's kind of an interesting thing for people to jump on. Like, by leaving the EU, we will have control over the shape of our bananas, and it's just this like top level headline that people are using because they've not bothered to educate themselves on what it actually is that they wanted from this. And I think that's why he maybe comes across as patronising. But how can you not be patronising in that case? I don't know. And this other person reviewing it said that, went on to say that he kind of says that this, that people are voting and doing these things because they're what their problem with this is that James O'Brien says that people are only doing this because they're not thinking for themselves because they're being drip-fed a diet of low-level hatred for years and years by the Daily Mail. And while that certainly is a factor, and this is quoting from this person's review, and while I think the Daily Mail is horrific beyond measure, the author seems to overlook the fact that these people are capable of thinking for themselves. And I'm going to mention it again. The book, Mindfuck, about Cambridge Analytica, just really tears apart this person's view, because it's not that we're not thinking for ourselves, it's that every single bit of information that we're receiving, if we're not actively trying to identify good information and bad information, is targeted and curated in a way to make us believe a certain thing, which makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to form a view that isn't within this echo chamber and this construct of, companies like the Daily Mail and their parent companies. So while it's true that people are capable of thinking for themselves, and it's also true that James O'Brien is correct in the assumption that people can be quite easily led accidentally. And views on this book that are positive, kind of talk about him being a sane voice, him really not trying to antagonize people, which I think is good. And he is a little bit, like I've said, he is a little bit kind of bigging it up for entertainment's sake, but overall I think he is a voice for good and a voice for reason within this debate, or within these many debates. Now, one of the things that I found difficult to read and kind of didn't like was when he was talking about feminism and let's try and find the so he talks briefly about how difficult it can be to know someone else's intentions, and he talks with a woman he calls Fiona in this about an interaction she had with someone who complimented her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable, but she pretty much knew the guy didn't mean it that way. And I get this. This is a thing that if you read Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers, you will realise there's so much of in this world where we don't understand the difficulty in interacting with someone else. We don't understand that what we say might be taken in a different way because of a different belief system, a different thought system, or anything. And so he asked this woman basically, like, was this guy being a creep? And she was like, no, but the thing that he said, oh no, I've lost it. Was he being a creep? But, I was doing my articles in a city law firm, and one weekend it was just me and a senior partner in the office. Being a Saturday, I was wearing jeans, and when we were in the lift together with no one else, he told me that he loved the way I filled them out. And James asked, was he a creep? She says, no, he was incredibly awkward, not just with women, and quite shy. Senior partners in city law firms have a status that leads some of them to be incredibly that leads some of them to be incredibly arrogant and overbearing. But this guy was nothing like them. I've dealt with them too, of course, but it was that thing you said about not knowing when you've crossed the line that made me think of this incident. And James says, lots of people listening will be wondering why you've rung in. I might even be one of them. They'll be thinking that sounds quite innocuous, especially given that previous callers have described some pretty gross conduct. Fiona, I know. I didn't know myself at the time why it upset me so much. I certainly didn't feel threatened, but I think I do now. He was telling me, whether he realised it or not, that he had imagined me naked, or at least in just my knickers, and he wanted to tell me how much he'd enjoyed the mental images. James, blimey, I'd never thought of it like that before. So it disturbed you so much precisely because he defined the stereotype of the workplace. He defied the stereotype of the loudmouth or the Lothario. Yeah, I can't remember how much time we spent in the lift after he said it, and I'm on, well, thank you, before giggling like an idiot. But I think I felt shame and I only just worked out why. James, you realise that he would have had absolutely no idea how you felt. We all know men who revel in making women uncomfortable, who sexualise the most banal exchanges. But from what you've said, he would probably have been absolutely mortified if he'd known how he'd made you feel, and not making excuses, but he thought he was paying you a compliment. Fiona, I know, that's why I rang. It's more about the words than the man sometimes, isn't it? And actually, now I've just read that again. James is on side with my belief system as well. He is saying that from that he then goes on to say that it hurt him to realise that those interactions might happen, and it's not just the brash, horrible people who are causing distress to other people. So I guess I've found one less thing that I dislike about this book. Overall, as much as I've said I dislike the kind of strategic outline of the book, I liked it. I enjoyed it as a read. It's just poppy enough that I was able to read it, for fun over the Christmas break. It's interesting enough that it kept me thinking for days afterwards, and for weeks afterwards actually. It's changed the way I'm willing to approach situations where I'm going to be talking to people whose views really differ from me. And I think that's the person who should read this book. If you're the kind of person who enjoys the confrontation of like an argument with someone whose beliefs differ from you, then it's maybe not for you. But if you're the kind of person who feels like they end up in these discussions, maybe with family members, maybe with colleagues, where they're expunging these views that you really don't like, but in the past you find yourself kind of nodding along, going, yeah, okay, hopefully this will end soon, then maybe this book is for you, because it'll give you a little bit of a roadmap on how to deal with that conversation, and not only deal with it, but have an actual productive interaction with that person, as opposed to you kind of coming away just feeling like, oh, I hate it. So I do recommend it. I think that overall it's well written. It's something that you can easily enjoy. It's a real quick read as well. It may be, a couple of hundred pages, like 220 pages, but it's 220 pages of like quick read. There's nothing too lofty to understand in there. You're not going to have to go back and read it again and again. So it is, it's a read for when you would probably be reading, a Dan Brown book. No, you wouldn't. You'd never be reading a Dan Brown book. Let's not be silly. Maybe you'd be reading a Michael Crichton book. Let's go with Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton's one of my favourite authors. I'm just rereading Jurassic Park for the God knows how many at the time. Maybe you would be reading like one of them, like a political thriller, a technological thriller, but actually you think, do you know what? I hear all this chat of Brexit, I hear all this chat of like unisex toilets and non-binary, and I want to read something that's as easy to read as a thriller, but will actually progress my life in some meaningful way. It's a book for those kind of times. You go in away for the weekend, you need a book for the train or the plane. It's for that kind of thing, and I think you'll enjoy it. I think if you're kind of like left-leaning liberal, you'll probably be the target market for it. And I think if you're not, I really would wish. I think if you're not that target market, I would really love you to read it, and I'd really love to hear what you have to say about it, because it's not often enough that people read stuff that makes them uncomfortable or annoyed in long form. We read stuff we're uncomfortable or annoyed with all the time when it comes to like social media, but we read this much of it and we just get the headline and we let it make us get angry. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm going to give it a percentage score. So often my percentage scores are quite high. Ambulance. Police car? Ambulance. Leave a comment, let me know which you think it is. Oh my god. I've lost my train of thought now. So yeah, percentage scores, often they're quite high because these are mostly books that I really, I want to read. If I've taken the time to review them, it means I've maybe read them more than once. And so, yeah, it will skew a little high. There are very rarely books in that lower 50%. And again, this is going to be one of the same. I'm probably going to give this book 71%. And by probably, I mean this book is getting 71% from me. Hopefully that helps. That's a 7 out of 10 if you want to round it, and what's that in? It's 3.5 out of 5 stars, if that's your metric. One thing that I've not done in these reviews to date is something that I'm going to add to these now, because this is how I read and this is how I choose books. And I'm going to recommend some books that are linked to this. So if you find that you've read this and you want to fall down a little bit of a rabbit hole of similar books, or books that will help you understand things that this has brought to your attention, I'm going to recommend 3 different books. On one side, you've got How to Talk to Strangers, and I'll link my review of that somewhere up in the corner, maybe, because I did a live stream on that as well, and that's by Malcolm Gladwell. That's a great book for understanding other people's points of view. Then, in another direction, I've mentioned it a couple of times already, is Mindfuck, and that's the book about Cambridge Analytica, and that's by... Why haven't I put this down? Mindfuck is by... why is it not coming up? So its full title is Mindfuck, Cambridge Analytica and the Plot to Break America. And why can I not find who it's written by? Christopher Wiley, who sort of turned whistleblower for them, and kind of life got fucked up because of it. If you've got any books that you think might link to these, get in the chat or in the comments if you're watching this on a rerun. And the last book that I'm going to recommend as a link to this is Permanent Record, which is Edward Snowden's story as told by Edward Snowden. And I really enjoyed that book. I listened to it twice, and I watched both the documentary and the dramatisation with what's his name, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I watched both of those. They're really great. I've really enjoyed the whole Permanent Record book, and that is again a little bit about how hearts and minds are changed, and how things like Brexit came about and how Donald Trump was elected. Interesting if you want to get into the kind of conversations that this book will maybe encourage you to get into. So that's it for this review. If you look down in the description, you'll see a couple of links, the Genius links, to this book, which is obviously something that I recommend you read. If you do get it from that link, I get a little bit of a kickback. You don't pay any extra, but it just helps me keep this channel going. It helps me pay for the internet. It doesn't really, I get less than a penny every time you buy a book, but every little helps, doesn't it? And there's also a link to buy Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I'm going to talk about next week on Sunday's live stream. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to watching, whether you've watched this live, whether you dipped in and out, whether you're going to watch this when it's posted to watch anytime on my channel. And if you do have comments, if you do have anything to say, just say it, get in touch with me, be that in the comments, in the chat. You still got a couple of minutes left, or maybe you find me on Instagram and connect with me on there. Direct message me, leave me some comments. However that may be, I just want this to be a conversation between me and you guys. I want this to be more of a, I want there to be a section in this live stream where I can look at the comments and say, yes, this book does this, the thing that you've asked me. This book, I do recommend it for, people who are interested in, or like what, anything that you want to ask, anything you want to say. If you've read the book and you want to be part of the conversation in a more kind of meaningful way, and you want to say, hey, what did you think about this bit? That would be amazing. That's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to build here. That's the kind of thing that I think will be more interesting than me just kind of talking it through. Let me know if you like or dislike the way that I go about this, how long it is. I know that I kind of aim for about 45 minutes, and I do that so that people can sort of dip in and out, and maybe people who have things to say can put them in the comments or in the chat, should I say, because I think if this was only like a 10-minute thing, you kind of might miss that, whatever. And it would be really helpful if you gave this a like, gave it a thumbs up. If you don't already subscribe to When Will I Learn, that would be incredible too. If you could tap subscribe. There's a little bell next to it. If you're not super familiar with YouTube, that bell is like a way of you telling YouTube that you actually do care about the thing that you subscribe to. I think YouTube has this like idea that people subscribe to channels that they don't really care about, but the bell icon will like reinforce to them that you want to hear about it, and within that you can have yourself be notified via YouTube, and it will send out a little reminder when I've started a live stream, so that you can kind of jump on and join in with the chat when I'm live. So thank you again for sticking with me. Hopefully you go and check out the books, maybe buy them, read them for yourself. And as I say, if you use those links down in the description, you don't pay any extra. And if you're comfortable buying from Amazon, buy them through those links, and I will be eternally grateful. Thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next one, next Sunday. Check out my videos through the week. I have videos weekly, and I'm going to try and stick to that as much as possible. And I'll leave you with some of the B-roll from the beginning.